But again, I feel like we're on the conservative merry-go-round then of never wanting to address
That's not a conservative merry-go-round. I can give you 10 ways.
Well, sure. But so like here would be the merry-go-round. I would say that like there's a minimum funding for schools that I think would help children. And then we go, well, the thing that would help them the most is two-parent households. And I go, okay, well, two-parent households actually aren't the problem. The issue is access to things like birth controls, that people don't have children early on. And it's like, but the issue isn't actually birth control. The issue is actually you need a certain amount of money to move out early and to get married and then to have a two-parent household. So it's actually like economic opportunity.
No.
Well, it's not.
No, just two-parent households. That's
yeah, but like, what are the precursors?
Don't fuck people before you're married and have babies.
Sure,
done.
That's great. We can say that and try to fight against, however many hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution. But people will have sex and people will make babies.
And then they used to get married. The vast majority of people in this country with kids used to be married. The vast majority of people with kids in this country now are not married increasingly. That is obviously a societal change. Something changed. It wasn't human evolution.
But a lot of those things in terms of resting on whether or not people get married have to do with financial decisions. Do you have the money?
People are worse off now than they were 50, 60 years ago when the marriage rates were higher.
People are delaying the start of their careers because education is becoming increasingly important.
So in other words, people are richer now and they have more education now, and yet they're having more babies out of wedlock now because they're richer and have more education.
I'm saying that one of the biggest indicators for whether or not somebody's willing to get married is how much money both people are making if they can move out of their household. People don't tend to want to get married at 22 when they've just finished college, when they don't have the money to move out and they can't afford a house.
Because we have changed the moral status of marriage in the culture, meaning that everyone, poor, rich, and in between, used to get married. By the way, a huge percentage of marriages in the United States used to be what they would call shotgun marriages, meaning that somebody knocked somebody up, and because they did not want the baby to be born outside of a two-parent household, they would then get married.
Do we think that shotgun marriages, though, are a way to bring back equilibrium to education?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yes, 100%.
Do we
a
think
child deserves a mother and a father?
Sure.
Because that is the basis for all of this, including education.
Do we think that shotgun marriages are, well, let's say this. Do we think that that's a reasonable direction that society would ever take? Or is this like...
Yes, it was the reasonable direction for nearly all of modern history.
But history moves in one direction, right?
Why?
Because of time?
I mean, people don't think that's in what way is that?
I don't think we've ever regressed social standards back to like, oh, well, let's go 100 years back and do things that, used to exist before.
That's weird. The entire left right now is arguing that we regress social standards by rejecting Roe versus Wade. So that's obviously not true.
The Roe versus Wade is not a social standard. It's a Supreme Court ruling, number one. Number two, if you read the actual majority opinion on Roe v. Wade, we can see that socially we actually never made huge progress on how society viewed abortion. This has always been an incredibly divisive thing, right? Even that was, I think, part of Alito's writing on it was that things like gay marriage, for instance, we've kind of moved past and it's not really as debated anymore, but abortion was never a settled topic despite Roe v. Wade.
The notion that the arc of history constantly moves in one direction is belied by nearly all of the 20th century.
What do we mean by that?
I mean,
in terms of like women's rights, civil rights,
barbarism, communism, Nazism, all of that was a regression from what was happening at, for example, the beginning of the 19th century and the 20th century.
In what way?
Nazism and communism weren't a regression from what was going on in 1905?
These are, in terms of like communism being a regression, for instance, I'm not a communist, but like the industrialization of the Soviet Union happened under a communist society. The industrialization...
So murder of tens of millions of people.
Yeah,
I consider that a regression. A moral regression, which is what we are talking about now, moral regression. And you're suggesting that moral regression, I wouldn't term a return to traditional values a moral regression, you would. But your suggestion is that history only moves in one direction. And I'm suggesting that history does not only move in one direction, it tends to move actually back and forth.
Sure. I don't think that all of history moves in one direction. There are going to be wars. There are going to be times of peace. I think in general, we're more peaceful now than we have been in the past. But I think when we look at the way that people live their lives, I think that we tend to move in a certain direction socially. So when it comes to things like racism or when it comes to things like slavery or women's rights, I think that there are two huge things that probably aren't changing in the US. And one is access to contraception and one is women working jobs. I think that these two things are probably huge things that are moving us off of shotgun marriages or getting married very early on. And I don't see those. Do you think that those two things are going to change fundamentally?
First of all, what the data tend to show is that actually more highly educated people, as you were saying, tend to get married more. So if the idea is that women getting an education somehow throws them off marriage, it's the opposite. Usually those women are not educated.
But those women aren't getting shotgun marriages. Those women aren't having children.
Yeah, but now you're shifting the topic. My topic was how to get more people married. And what I'm and then you suggested that higher levels of education are delaying marriage and making it less probable. And what I'm telling you, because this is what the data suggests, is that actually as you raise up the educational ladder, people tend to be married more than they are lower down on the educational ladder. If you're a high school graduate, you're less likely to be married than if you're a postdoc.